And you're very welcome back to the show. We are turning to GAA. The curtains come down on the 2022 inter-county season in the men's football and hurling. Still the ladies' football and the camogie finals to come. And then, of course, the club season will take centre stage. To reflect on the men's inter-county, football year in particular that was, we're joined by Mick Foley of the Sunday Times. We have Maurice Brosnan of the 42. And we have Colm Keys of the Irish Independent. Gents, you're all very welcome. We might start with an obvious point, is that we're having this conversation mid-July. Alan Dillon, the former Mayo player and Fine Gael TD, was voicing concerns. He's one of several, I suppose, voicing concerns over the July finish. To give you a sense of what he was saying, he said, Alan Dillon here, too early in the year for the senior football and hurling championships to be finished. The race for Sam Maguire, Liam McCarthy this year, brilliant, along with the inaugural Tailteann Cup. They kept us enthralled and excited for the last few months. So why lock away your best shows for almost half a year? It simply doesn't make sense. And he goes on to talk about how supportive he is of the club game, and he is very much a club man. But he says we won't have any more inter-county action until next January at the earliest, more than 5 months away. In the meantime, other sports get the attention and coverage the GAA would normally have achieved throughout August and September, and he's pushing for a finish date in August or September. So we might get the ball rolling on that point, Colm. It's been a big talking point all year. Now that it's done and dusted, what are we to say of it?
Well, I would think the split season, Joe, is here to stay. I think it's worked out pretty well, notwithstanding that it is over quite soon and quite sudden, but that was always going to be the way. I think from a couple of points of view, probably there is, to my mind, probably a 2-week tweak here. And I might have said that to you even last January. I know we had this discussion. There may be a 2-week tweak here where everything can just be balanced ever so slightly. But the idea that we're going back to September or even the end of August with this, I don't think will happen. And I don't think it probably should happen either, because from what I gather, players and managers those involved in inter-county football have enjoyed it. They've enjoyed being able to break off earlier, and they're the participants. They're the ones that are, investing their time and commitment to all of that. I do think from a club point of view, there hasn't been a sufficient adjustment yet, and there may not be a sufficient adjustment either. And that's where I think the 2 weeks come in. I think that if you push it out by 2 weeks, you're allowing the leagues to start maybe a week later, and you're also allowing then the third level competitions to be given a little bit more time. And I do think, and I know you have to factor in Cork, right? You take them as the biggest county with the most enlarged championships, and you have to put them into the whole picture. So how long does it take to complete their program? And it's around 13 or 14 weeks, and you work back from that. So maybe by putting the All-Ireland Club semi-finals just back into January and the All-Ireland Club final obviously in January again, allowing the Sigerson and Fitzgibbon Cups with a little bit more breathing space and starting the league just a week later, and maybe extending it out next year, because I think it will be pretty frantic next year with the 3 round-robin games in Tailteann Cup and in Sam Maguire. I do think there'll be a few pinch points there, and there are a few pinch points at present. But I think overall, the split season has worked well. I know people will miss August and the big games and all of that. And there are, some concerns about the promotion of the game, but it's a participation sport, and you must give the majority of the participants their time at the right time of the year. And the right time of the year for that is August, September and October. And if there is a little bit of an overlap just at the beginning of August next year, I don't think anyone would complain too much about that. Be interesting to see what the crowds are like. With regard to publicity and with regard to coverage and all of that, yes, it's a bit fast-paced and all of that, but you must remember it's not much shorter than the season would have been anyway, because there were 6 weeks there in April and well into May where there was no inter-county games either, prior to the COVID years in 2018, 2019, when everything was realigned. So there's only slightly less weekends and therefore slightly less coverage perhaps. But overall, it has worked. It has worked reasonably well. I think there's a bit of work to be done by counties with their club programs to align that. And I think by maybe adding or stretching it out 2 weeks, and I don't think there's a great urgency. I don't sense an urgency among the GA officials to even make that small change. But I do think it would be beneficial all round just to squeeze it by a week or two more and take it into August and release those pinch points that are going to come next year.
Where are you, Mick?
Yeah, I kind of agree with most all of that, really. Like, I mean, you can't, the GA can't sort of budget for things that are going to happen into the future too much. Like, you can't really budget for, you certainly can't budget for Ireland winning a rugby tour or rugby series below in New Zealand for the very first time on the same weekend as an All-Ireland hurling final. But you could definitely have budgeted for an Irish golfer being up the leaderboard in the Open, something like that. And I do agree. I think, like, even if they just nudged out the hurling final, let's say, till this Sunday gone by, and the football final to this coming Sunday now, for example, I think that would give you enough wriggle room just to sort of let the whole thing breathe a little bit. Yeah, and I think, look, at the other thing as well is, like, the season, the intercounty season is over, but the real proof of the pudding in this won't be until the full season is over, and see how the club thing works out. Colm's 100% right. Like, I mean, at the root cause of all of this, like, is trying to create more space for club players to play their games. But for that to work, county boards have to get it right. They have to get their fixture schedule right. They have to get their structures right. They have to get all those elements in place as well for this to work. So, like, in bits and bobs over the last 3 or 4 months, you have people sprinting out to say this is right or wrong, or this is working or it's not working. Can't say it's working or not working until at least the end of this year and probably the end of next year. Like, for years, we gave out about issues around the calendar and so on and so forth. And they've finally done something about it, right? Whether it's right or wrong, at least they'll learn anyway what works, what doesn't work, and we can move along with that. But as Colm says, I mean, the notion of going back to September and all that carry on, that ship to sail, lads. That's gone.
Maurice, maybe a week or two tweaking. Is that what your sense is as well?
I imagine so, Joe. Yeah, I think the two boys nailed the crux of the issue there. I would say that, like, I find it interesting how quickly people are to, in some places outright dismiss players' concerns on this issue. And to be honest, I think this conversation probably belongs at the end of the year. As Larry McCarthy was at pains to mention, the season is not over. The intercounty season is over, but we have 6 months of this more where maybe you can make an assessment and tweak it then. But I do definitely think, like, at the crux of this is players' concerns. I heard Roy Grugan speak on your show last week about this. I asked Tommy Doyle about this. Players seem broadly in favour of it. It's my understanding the GPA are currently serving players about this as well. Maybe those results will point us in a better direction. But at the, promotion is obviously very relevant. All these kind of talks about, we're all looking at a very barren August. I fully appreciate all those concerns. But if you're going to build a hierarchy, the priority has to be players' concerns, and that should probably steer. So, I think this conversation probably should happen at the end of the year when we've had a year to make a kind of broader assessment, see how the club season goes. I think Kevin Donovan is on the record to say Cork would find it very difficult to fill a club campaign if even we did a 2-week split. So that has to be taken into consideration as well. But yeah, as I say, I think this conversation belongs maybe in December when we've seen a full club campaign, a full intercounty campaign, and seen how it all works.
Okay. To the football year that was then, very brief synopsis of the provincials. We had Galway beating Mayo and Connacht, which was an early jolt there, and then it was smooth sailing thereafter. In Munster, it was very routine for Kerry. Leinster, Dublin cruised as well, like the 5 goals in the Leinster final against Kildare really killed that one early, and that was painfully anticlimactic. And then Ulster, I guess, held up its end of the bargain, as is increasingly traditional. Tyrone collapsed, which gave us something, and then Derry beat Monaghan, Tyrone, and of course Donegal in a final where, it was somewhere between boring and intriguing, depending on your perspective, I suppose. So what are we to say, Mick, of the provincials once again?
Meh, I would say, would be the word. Meh. Like, Munster, Leinster, nothing to see here. Ulster, to me, Ulster was a competition of stories rather than great matches. Like, off the top of my head now, I was thinking about it this morning, how many good games were there? Really, no good games were there? And I can think of 4 overall. Like, Armagh Galway was a terrific game. Dublin Kerry was a very good game. The final was a very good game. And Galway Mayo was a very good game. You mentioned the Ulster final there. It really does seem to depend where you were, your location for that match. If you were at it, it was a dinger. But if you were sitting through it on television, you just wanted to go out the back and scream. So, like, where do you go with that? I think in terms of Ulster, I think the story of Derry, terrific, just fantastic what they achieved. And of course, with that comes more sort of focus on how they play the game and so on and so forth. And I wouldn't be critical at all of how they play the game, to be brutally honest. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to play football. It's up to the other crowd to deal with it. And Derry found out themselves in an All-Ireland semi-final that they'll have to evolve their game anyhow. Like the story of Tyrone is a great story, as you mentioned. The story even of Donegal, what happened there. And Armagh, of course, again, kind of, I suppose by their standards, failing in Ulster and coming back again though in the qualifiers to finish the year in the same way as we saw them at the beginning of the league when they beat Dublin, which is a coming team, evolving, developing, and coming to something. Connacht Championship, the Connacht Championship was always going to be interesting this year. It's going to be even more interesting next year now, between Galway, Mayo and Roscommon as well. As I say, Galway Mayo was a terrific game at the start of the year. It set out the stall for Galway as well going forward. And, I suppose in a way it set out the stall for Mayo as well in terms of what issues they were going to face up to as the competition got stiffer. So if you're asking me specifically about the provincials, as I say, meh would be the word I'd say.
Yeah, it's hard to argue. What, Colm, about Mick's general feeling? 4 games which really got the blood pumping across the football championship: Armagh, Galway, Dublin, Kerry, Galway, Mayo, and the final, Kerry, Galway. Beyond that, much ado about nothing.
I'd probably throw Donegal, Armagh in the qualifiers. I think I'd put that in there. I was at that myself, and I enjoyed that. That was there was plenty in that. It's always something when two Ulster teams, well-matched Ulster teams, go at each other in qualifiers. It's very, very often a different game. I always remember in 2005, Tyrone and Armagh played 2 Ulster finals in Croke Park, and they were really, really poor. Really poor games. And then they come out and everybody's expecting a third installment in the trilogy of what went on before, and they produce a classic. And in some ways, the Armagh Donegal Ulster match dragged on a little bit, but I thought there was so much in that game in Clonus, just the way it went away from Donegal and Armagh's performance that day in the second half once they got on top. And I suppose Tyrone and Armagh as well, that had a little bit. So after those 4 games that Mick mentioned, you'd probably place those. And also Monaghan and Derry, even though there was slow burn in it, but there was plenty of slow burn in pedestrian football in the All-Ireland final last Sunday when you look back at it too. The play does slow down. There is pause. And that's the intriguing category, isn't it? That's
sure is.
Into the intriguing category.
Incredibly intriguing.
I think the mix between strategic and instinctive football now is you're looking for that mix. You're not going to get an end-to-end, breathless football at breakneck speed all the time, but you are getting enough that when there are turnovers and when there is an urgency to go and chase down a game, as there was, for Armagh after a bad start against Tyrone that day, and obviously Monaghan had to come out after concession of goals against Derry. When there is an urgency, things free up a little bit. And some of those Ulster games, and particularly those qualifier games between Ulster counties, were next in line. So there was a little bit more maybe than those 4 games. But you'd have to say when the action got to Croke Park, it got altogether better. And I thought last Sunday was just brilliant to watch 2 players going head to head like that as they did. And there was a lot in the semi-final between Dublin and Kerry. I don't put that game up there beside 2013 or 2016 semi-finals. I just have it a level below that.
Yeah. Mick, were we ever getting 7, 8, 9 good games a year?
Oh God, you're testing my memory now. Just to, I suppose to kind of qualify what I'm saying, if you look at the issue always with the championship, and I hate to go down this road of structures, but the issue with the championship always is the mismatches, right? And when you get teams that are of inferior quality to another crowd and they go out and it's damage limitation, and that kind of style of football seeps into other elements of the competition and other teams, and then you have an issue. It's always the way, when you get well-matched teams put together on a given day, the game is generally going to be pretty good. It's going to be pretty good. And the All-Ireland final, if you look over the All-Ireland finals of the last bunch of years, there's been very few that have been bad or not interesting or not of a high quality. Sunday was a terrific game. And everything, if you want to talk about, in inverted commas, modern football, is the game in good health? Well, Sunday would suggest that it's in good health. It's a completely different game from what we're talking about, or from what might have been there some years before. But then what was there some years before was totally different from what was there a generation before that again. So that's irrelevant. You're just looking, is this entertaining? And it's, is there an element of spectacle? Is there an element of intelligence in the football? And there is and there was. And that comes when you put good teams matched up against each other, well matched. We got a touch of that in the Tailteann Cup as well, in terms of putting teams together that should be playing against each other at that level. You know, it shows what the football championship can become and will become now under this new system. I think you're going to have far more good games, far better matches, because you're going to get teams that should be playing each other more regularly and more often, and who won't be afraid of each other. They're going to go out. Teams are going to go out, even if they're, you know, it's a inherently defensive team mindset. Like, they're still going to go out thinking we can have a crack off the other crowd. They're going to believe they can win, and they will have more. It'll be more likely for teams to have a crack off the other crowd.
So, Maurice, to what extent here is Mick an ungrateful, grumpy old man?
There's probably just two elements to that, I would say. Like, just to circle back, this actually links to our conversation previously, Joe. If you go back to the talk about the split season, you know, rather than talk about maybe what the promotion damage that does to the game, I would kind of like to focus on, can we promote the game while it is on? So I thought there was good games in the early rounds of championship this year. You know, Wicklow and Laois stands out to me as an absolute shootout. You know, you have 8 goals in an opening round of an Leinster championship game, but nobody saw that game, so it probably doesn't live long in the memory. The first game that went to penalty this year was Clare and Limerick. That was a really competitive, really tight game, but unless you had access to, you know, a dodgy Periscope link, you don't get to see that game, and therefore you don't get to celebrate it, and it skews your perception of the championship as a result. So if maybe I thought we'd built up an infrastructure over the last 2 years to actually stream these games, and we seem to have gone back to, you know, regress to worse than what we had previously. So if we've been able to see those games, I think there's probably an element of that. I also think, just on the second point about the quality of games, you know, I am far from a back in the day kick and catch, you know, belover, but I do think that we probably saw for the first time in my lifetime anyway a decline in the standard of football over the last 2 years, and it's understandable. I think it was probably COVID introduced, you know, you had less collective training sessions, so there, as a result you probably have less time to work on structures, less kind of cohesion, just inbuilt team stuff. That doesn't mean the games weren't entertaining, by the way, but you know, I just look at the turnover rate, the wide rate, the quality of, particularly last year, lads, because the quality of some of the games we saw, while they were good, you know, I kind of maintained that the final and both semi-finals was fairly low quality stuff. Whereas I actually think this year now we've finally seen a drastic improvement. You know, Kerry's last game of last year was a semi-final against Tyrone. They had 35 turnovers in that game, 30 in the attacking third. You know, you fast forward to a final this year, they had 11 turnovers. I think they had 7 in the attacking third, 2 dropped into a goalkeeper's hands. The other 5, they were very shrewd. They're fouled directly after each one of those 5 turnovers. So that's a team getting smarter. That's a team building kind of cohesion. It leads to probably a better, you know, overall element of quality, and that's what we get to see at a weekend like that. So even small little bits of quality in that game, I thought, you know, you look at Patrick Kelly flicking the ball up off the ground, or Stephen O'Brien jumping on people's boots, the standard of blocks. I just think we've finally seen, and again, as I say, it's understandable, a 2-year break because of COVID, but we've finally seen an improvement in overall standard of play, as well as entertaining games, albeit some of them were off the beaten track.
Yeah, I guess off the beaten track is a big part of it, Mick, and not least when the early stages of the hurling is so compelling, because their round robin fizzes from minute 1.
Yeah, well, that's just the nature, and again, it goes back to structure. I mean, you've got teams that should be playing each other from the get-go in the hurling championship, coming up against each other in games that mean something. Whereas with the provincial championships, you have the mismatches that I'm talking about that drag down the vibe, and that's not the fault of the teams. Like, the teams are doing what they can. They're putting their best foot forward and trying to do what's best for them. It's just the nature of the competition in football, and it was like since the round robin has come in the hurling championship, it's been like that. That, you know, hurling has owned the first half of the season and football has rather taken over. I think even if you look at the number of hurling games that was on in the first couple of months of the season compared to, you know, half dozen or whatever in the last 5 or 6 weeks, compared to how the football goes the other direction, that's going to happen, you know. But I'm not being a grumpy old man, by the way. I'm being a grumpy young man, if anything. But like, kind of generally, you know, I would say it's been a good season. It's been a fine season. Yeah. It's just that, you know, I mean, you know, we've all talked around it there now. We've probably gotten up to 7 or 8 games that we could all, even just, you know, as a consensus, and that's okay out of the number of games that were played. But again, it's just the structure. It's the structure, and changing the structure is going to improve that number.
And to take up Mick's point, I mean, the end of the league, there was some great storylines. Obviously, Dublin were on the rack. I covered Monaghan beating them up in Clonus on the last day of the league. And okay, Dublin shrugged their shoulders and moved on, but it was still an asterisk to their season that they were relegated from Division 1. And the previous week, cracking game between Kerry and Armagh. There must have been 14 or 15,000 in the athletic grounds that day. And again, they're evenly matched teams. Well, much more evenly matched teams than maybe what you get in the provincial championships, and you produce good games. Obviously, it's the league and Dublin moved up a level. I understand all that, but it goes back to last October and the decision not to run with the proposal to flip the league into championship. I still think that will be on the table in 5 or 6 years' time once the provincial championships next year will start to deplete, because they're going to be run off from probably early April to early May. I would say 5 weekends at most, possibly 4 provincial championships will be done and dusted before you go into the round robin series for Sam Maguire and Tailteann Cup. So that'll be looking at big change, and I think slowly but surely the provincial championships value will erode, even though they didn't for Derry this year. You have to accept that was a terrific win for them to beat the teams that they beat. 3 Division 1 teams, I think, was one of the highlights of the season for any team. It's right up there anyway, having not won it for 24 years the way they came. So that was a very noteworthy achievement, no doubt.
Clare's comeback against Roscommon, obviously full of drama, but it was an odd occasion because Croke Park was so empty, which was another aspect across a couple of games where you were having these matches in front of virtually nobody at Croke Park. We also, Maurice, have games being finished now, I suppose routinely-ish, via penalties. Are we okay with that?
I think so, yeah. Ronan O'Gara was very interested in your programme with this last week. It is obviously a skill of the game. The lottery conversation is probably not one that we need to have here. I don't think this is a side effect of the split season. Actually, it isn't a side effect of the split season. We talked about this a lot in 2019 when it first came in. You had situations in Antrim where you had chairman walking onto the pitch to call a halt to penalties. So there's always been a reluctance to it, but there also has been the element of it. So I think it's probably as good a way as any. I remember watching, hurling try the shootout from the 65, and it was just, there was no entertainment appeal to it. It was very kind of sterile. So I think it's, as somebody who was there at the Galway Armagh game, I was absolutely enthralled by it. I thought it was brilliant. So I think it is as good a way as any to decide on the day, and it just creates a better flow of fixtures as well if we're not going to be coming back for replays. So if this is the way we want to go with it, I think it's the best of a bad lot, basically.
Where are you in it, Mick?
Yeah, about the same. If and the crucial point is Maurice's final line there. If this is the system, if this is the schedule and the calendar that Jay want, well then there's no room for replays and there's no room for there's just not the space unless you're going to play them on a Wednesday night or something. So I have no issue with penalties whatsoever. No, I thought as Maurice said, the Armagh Galway thing was a great spectacle. It's always, there is an element of the gladiators or the Christians being eaten by the lions, all right, though, when you're sitting back and you're enthralled and the lads are just going through hell below, and the guys who miss it, of course, but look, that's the nature of penalty shootouts. Yeah.
I did wonder, Colm, if at a certain point in the season, and maybe from that stage where Armagh Galway met, that we should allow for replays. I mean, if we're starved of games where we have decent teams of a similar standard coming up against each other often enough, then by definition we're passing up on the opportunity there to see Armagh Galway all over again.
I wouldn't have a big issue with penalties, but it is probably a factor. If you're allowing it for an All-Ireland final, well then maybe you make the distinction for semi-finals too. There is that. But if you are allowing for it, you're also allowing for the fact that there's only 1 week between a semi-final and a final, because that's not going back to 3 weeks. Personally, I think I'd extend extra time by a little bit more, maybe 5 minutes more, 2.5 minutes more, because generally there's a caution, there's a conservatism about extra time that almost leads it to penalties. There's almost a fear there among teams that they give the ball away. They don't really go for it as much in extra time. So I might just extend extra time and allow for maybe another substitute or two in game in that extra period, because you're going to be broadening the squads next year because of the volume of games that little bit. So I think it could cater for that. Wouldn't be against replays for semi-finals, except that you're only giving the winners, the eventual winners, 1 week to prepare for an All-Ireland final. And I think ultimately when that would become the reality, that would create a lot of difficulties for the county and also for the players. So it's not ideal, but it's still, let's face it, we all enjoyed the penalty shootout and Galway hit their force superbly. All great strikers of the ball. So there is a skill there, as Maurice said, and there is a nerve there and all of that. But I think I'd probably just extend extra time by a little bit more first. Only about 5 minutes.
Because, Colin, one of the arguments we threw around in here was, well, this isn't a low-scoring game like, say, football, soccer, in that eventually you're just going to have to call time on it and go to penalties. There will be scores in extra time in Gaelic football, and if you just set a target of first team to get to 3 points or first team to get to 4 points, you will get there. Whereas, you could play another 2 hours in soccer and you might still not have another goal.
You'd have to allow for wind factor there, I suppose. Joe, I wouldn't like to be playing over in Salt Hill, let's say, and be playing into the Salt Hill end.
The coin toss would be crucial there.
And racing up to 4 there before, and you reach the magic figure, and you could be there in 5 minutes, and it's all over there, because obviously that's a factor that you must change ends and play both sides. So I don't think that's all that realistic to have the golden score or anything like that, because of the wind factor at so many venues. And even in Croke Park, coming in from the hill end, you could get any kind of breeze coming over the hill there.
I hadn't thought of that. I suppose it's a bit tiresome to change ends every point, isn't it?
It probably is. But look, initially, when Winner on the Day came in a couple of years back, few years back, there was it was 10 minutes of extra time, and if it was still level after 10 minutes of extra time, there was an extra 5 minutes each side after that. Now that's probably too long, but maybe just to extend the first segment of extra time by a little bit to see can you determine a winner and then go to penalties. I know you're dragging games up to well beyond 100 minutes at that stage, but you can expand to the number of replacements maybe by 1 in extra time. Currently it's 3. You can change the whole team and put out a new team, obviously at full time. But maybe if you allowed for 1 more substitute and brought it up to 15 minutes of extra, 25 minutes or half an hour of extra time, I think you'd probably get winners out of that, more winners, and take it away from penalties.
Okay, we're going to take a very short break. Colm Keys of the Irish Independent, Maurice Brosnan from the 42, and Mick Foley of the Sunday Times staying with us. You're very welcome back. So we're chatting through the season that was, the football season that was in the men's football. Mick Foley of the Sunday Times, Maurice Brosnan of the 42, and Colm Keys of the Irish Independent are with us. Mick, the most redundant question of the year is probably Footballer of the Year.
Oof, yeah. No big calls for, no, I'm not even going to mention other players, no. David Clifford, sure, obviously. And look, sure, what can you say about the guy? I mean, when you consider that he did what he did whilst injured as well for a spell in the middle of the season, a key spell in the middle, he had a great year. And I'm not sure, when you look at how Kerry won the All-Ireland, in my mind they kind of won the All-Ireland correcting the things that they couldn't do to the required level in previous years, which you couldn't say that's the case for David Clifford. But it just shows you how, I suppose, when you get your defence right, it does liberate the rest of your team, and it does give your best players the stage and the platform to do their best work, And I mean, look, the last day in the All-Ireland final, what struck me about him really was, I mean, far beyond just the otherworldly skill of the man, it was just the mentality, And this is nothing new to anybody who's been watching him. I appreciate that, but just the mind, just the peace of mind to take 2 marks in the first half when Kerry just weren't firing. The groove, they just didn't have the groove in the attack, and he had the peace of mind just to call down a couple of marks on himself, tap him over the bar, keep it ticking, just keep the show on the road, and then when the moment came when he had to strike the really clutch scores, he was there as well. I mean, it's just exceptional. We're going to run out of stuff to say about him fast.
It'll be very hard to keep writing new original pieces about him for the next 15 years. So, Colm, over the next 5 years, how many All-Irelands do Kerry win?
I don't believe it'll be a dynasty like they enjoyed for the minor teams. Obviously, they were all different minor teams that went from year to year. They'll certainly will win one, Joe, and it may not be next year, but it could be the year after or the year after that, and they might get 2. But I think the landscape has changed. I see Tyrone coming back strong, if not next year, but probably next year. And then when they integrate Rory Canavan's group and some of their current minor team too will be well capable over a 3 to 4 year period of stepping up and replacing all those players that moved away. And I expect we'll see 1 or 2 of those back for next season too. I think that Tyrone will repair well. I think Dublin have got into a consistent mode there, and I think as long as they've Brian Fenton and Kieran Kilkenny especially driving things on, they will be a force. So I think that I don't see Kerry being that far ahead of everyone else. I do think they will win another one. Like I probably said the same thing in 2014, because in 2014 they won the All-Ireland and Gooch was out and he was coming back the following year, and you made that assumption that everything would return as it was. And Tommy Walsh coming out of Australia as well, coming back in 2015, you would have really projected that Kerry would win at least one or two more in the years that followed. And they didn't, and Dublin dominated. But I don't think there will be any dominant team. I do think they will settle. They'll enjoy this. There will be liberation next year. But the big goal out there, I think privately will be for Kerry. And they can only play who comes up against them. But no All-Ireland final win over Tyrone or Dublin would be a big goal for the group and for Kerry football, because I'm pretty sure it hasn't happened since 1986 when they beat Tyrone. They haven't beaten Dublin since 1985. It's been Mayo, Cork, Donegal and Galway that they've beaten in All-Ireland finals since. They've lost to Tyrone in All-Ireland finals. They've obviously beaten them in semi-finals. So somewhere out there probably is a motivation there for Kerry to come back to. Obviously they'll come back and they want to maximise their potential, but it'd be the last box to tick maybe to beat one of those in the All-Ireland final.
Maurice, I haven't heard anyone really talk of Kerry dynasty here. The most anyone who's kind of venturing is maybe to across the next 5 years.
Which I probably agree with, to be honest. I think it's probably the most exciting thing about looking forward to Gaelic football for the next couple of years is how even the landscape is and how many teams would look. I actually think that maybe Galway have set a template in the same way a lot of people would have talked about Tyrone last year in terms of the scope of what is attainable. Like a lot of people will look at Galway and think we could definitely achieve that within a year. I probably actually reckon, Joe, it's one of the under-told elements of the year because of Kerry's success is the turnaround in Galway from the mood around the county or even around the camp at the start of the year versus what it is now. And I think Pádraig Joyce does a huge amount of credit just for getting everybody back on the right track, for making necessary changes to his backroom team, for just improving the gradual mood, getting in interesting guest speakers, getting people like Ronan O'Gara in around the group and getting everybody on the same page, ticking a tactical box like Cian O'Neill. Galway probably got to an Ireland final with a core group of 16 you could maybe maintain. Now from their perspective there's huge scope for improvement. Again, you bring back in Conor Flaherty was their goalkeeper during the league. He comes back in. Sean McKern, a fullback, frees up Sean Kelly to come out the field. You look around the county and you've got proven inter-county quality playing club football who could come back in. So Galway will be very much optimistic about their future. But I also think there's a lot of teams will look at Galway like Armagh, Mayo, Donegal, Monaghan, and think we could absolutely be in their shoes next year. An All-Ireland final is very much attainable for us. And once you're there, you're in the 65th minute, the game is level and a crucial free goes against you and that might swing it. But from their perspective, as much as Kerry are there to be got it, I think a lot of teams could say we could get there and we could run them close as well.
Makes such a strange Dublin season, like a truly bizarre league campaign. It was kind of the story of the league with each consecutive defeat, and then they rally somewhat and they lose to Kerry minus Con and by the narrowest of margins. And now the sense is, or the rumour is, that maybe Desi is heading off into the sunset, but subject to confirmation. So what do we say of the Dubs in this rather bizarre year?
Well, I think, when it was unfolding, that league, you kind of just got the sense that, number one, right, you got to give these guys some degree of the benefit of the doubt here. Like, I mean, Desi, it's his first proper full season as well, post-COVID, whatever. It's the first time that they've had a full season to have a look at what they have. And they've obviously, they've had losses, they've had injuries to deal with. He's trying to develop a bench, basically, through the league. And does it work? Does it not work? He certainly found a couple of players, you could say, during the league, even though they got relegated. Leinster Championship goes the way it goes. But the one thing I thought about the Leinster Championship from the Dublin perspective was that they were playing with that precision and accuracy and speed that it didn't really matter who they were playing against. They would have won those games. Maybe not as comfortably as they did in Leinster, but they were doing all the right stuff, Cork game was very similar to how Kerry played Cork. They just death by 1,000 cuts. They didn't even bother, I don't think, really trying for goals. They just kicked their points and got to the semi-final. And what struck me about the semi-final then, when Con wasn't there, I mean, the spirit, number one. And I don't want to sound patronising, because you can talk about spirit and all this kind of stuff. It can, for a team like Dublin, it can sound a little bit ridiculous. But just, they were incredibly resilient. And they didn't back off at any stage in the game. And I would be among those who would believe that if it had gone to extra time, I think Dublin would have outlasted them. I think they might have won it. Equally, I think there was opportunities towards the end of the game as well if they had been handled slightly different. Like if you'd rolled the clock back 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure Seanie O'Shea would have got that chance at the end to win the game, to be honest. So all those things put together, I think there's enough there for Dublin going forwards to kind of consider themselves obviously serious contenders again next year. And whether if Desi has a mind to stay, he should certainly be given the option to stay, because as I say, this really was their first proper season in a proper championship, in a proper league, to have a look where they're going.
Maurice, do they still? Let's presume Desi stays for a moment. Do they look like a team to you that's on the decline?
Well, they win the Ireland if Conor Callan is fit, don't they? I think there's probably a consensus that they beat Kerry and they're probably a better team than Galway on paper. So it's a pretty fine margin to make a grand assessment of them. Just on your point though, Joe, I do think when you look at, if we give an overall sense of the year, one of the standout performances or moments for me was watching, a warrior like James McCarthy just, with defiance that at times kind of defied logic. And I don't know if you can replace that, if there is the reserves, if you hope and pray that he stays around and he has a similar ability in him again, but trying to replace that, as we've learned by the players who've already left this setup, it's not an easy thing to do. So if they leave, I think it's probably natural that they are on the decline. I don't know to what extent that is. They're on the decline from one of the all-time great teams to still a very, very competitive team. But in overall sense, they're still going absolutely nowhere. Conor Callan comes back into that team next year and they're still an absolute fear. They're probably going to be the second favourites for the All-Ireland.
Yeah. Colm, where are we in that general refrain of the last number of years that, geez, the way it's going, they've harnessed demographics, they've harnessed what's available financially, and they're going to win 4, 5, 6 out of every decade and we're doomed. Are we as fearful of that now, do you think, Colm?
Probably not, but that's not to say that they can come and surge again. I would think they'll always be a top 4 team in football. There isn't any doubt. I'd have no doubt about that they will always find. Certainly there's no Conor O'Callaghan or no Kieran Kilkenny, no obvious Kieran Kilkenny. Now, Brian Fenton wasn't the most obvious 2014 into 2015, maybe for some, but there was other midfielders at the time, as I recall, that were probably ahead of him, or at least it felt like they were ahead of him. So he came, in his 21st year, he came really strong into his 22nd year. So there is scope for players to develop all the time, and it's a very competitive club scene in Dublin too. So you will always produce players of a high standard, but those real A-listers, well, I don't think there's any on the horizon there, which has brought them back to the pack. But when you consider in 2019 that Kerry took basically the same Kerry team, took Dublin to a replay, albeit there was a man, Johnny Cooper, had been sent off in the drawing game. But that Dublin team had Stephen Cluxton, Paul Mannion, Jack McCaffrey and Conor O'Callaghan. And yet, 3 years on, Kerry are struggling. They need an extraordinary kick to win that semi-final. So if you chart it like that, have Kerry really gone off on a different trajectory over the last 3 years? Probably not. So, the expectation would have been that Kerry would really set off ahead of them. That hasn't happened. But structurally, Dublin will always be strong. They will always have those resources, both playing and financial. And it would not surprise me by the end of this decade if they took off on another run with a different group of players, because that's really the way it's set up. But there are a lot of good teams out there, and Galway would be one. The Galway brand is huge. It really is. And my understanding, even the money they raised between the All-Ireland football semi-final and semi-final was phenomenal. So there is a lot to tap into for the likes of Galway. And if you switch to hurling, I mean, look how well resourced the Limerick hurlers are as well. So a lot of the better teams may be resourcing themselves better. Dublin probably got a jump at the beginning of the last decade in that regard, but a lot of counties are resourcing themselves a lot better to be competitive. So maybe the gap just won't be as great. But I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the decade if another group would take off.
Mick, at a glance, you would look at Mayo and Donegal and say that the 2022 season rubber-stamped end of eras, respective eras for both. How true is that?
I don't agree. Certainly not in the Mayo. on the Mayo topic. I mean, look, a lot of that is going to be down to the management that they put in place, and the same for Donegal. I mean, Donegal, the thing, the refrain about Donegal all the years has been that, terrific players getting to a certain level, not quite getting to the next level. That hasn't changed. Like, I mean, the players are still there. Michael Murphy obviously is getting a little bit older, but the players are still there. I mean, it's funny actually, the Mayo one. You hate to be the guy to mention it, but like, the Mayo have the squad. If you look at the system that's coming in next year, injuries and all that kind of stuff is going to be a real issue. The one thing that's always held Mayo back has been just the lack of maybe that 8, 9 out of 10 player, a couple of 9 out of 10ers, a Conor Callaghan, a Clifford, Shane Welsh, someone like that. And I appreciate that these are generational players I'm talking about now, but you know what I mean, just that little bit extra class, right? But they're going to be coming back next year with Tommy Conroy and Ryan O'Donoghue, who weren't there at all this year, and Ciarán O'Connor, who should be a lot fitter than he was this year, given the injury he's recovering from last year. So, I mean, they're going to be enormous boosts to them. And the one thing you'd say about the latest Horan era, is that he evolved that squad. There's an awful lot of good 7 to 8 or 10 players there, that if other teams start picking up injuries, and even if Mayo do, and they've proved it this year again, that when they pick up injuries, they are able to maintain a certain level. And if they just get a little bit more luck with the injuries this next year coming, get the right management team in, I don't think it's an end of an era for Mayo at all. Okay, it's a little bit, it's a little bit like I mean, what Colin mentioned there, and you were asking about Dublin. I mean, the legacy of all this stuff is a bit like Mickey Hart with Tyrone 20 odd years ago. The legacy of this stuff is that you're always in the top 4. So Tyrone will always be in around the top 4 or 5 with a shot at winning All Ireland, and Dublin are the same. And that's what Kerry have done down the years. Kerry don't really do empires like. They win All Irelands at a fairly regular trot, like, but they don't. Like, Kerry have only done, I think it's 2 4 in a row and a 3 in a row. It's all 1s and 2s, and they're never that far away kind of stuff. And that's what you want as a county. You just want to be in the mix every year. And that's what Dublin will have. That's what Tyrone will have. And again, I think if Mayo make the right appointments, that's what they will have. They'll be back in the mix again next year. Yeah,
Maurice, that's a very strong argument to Mayo.
I couldn't agree more, to be honest. Yeah, the only counterpoint, I suppose, is you're looking at both Mayo and Donegal, and you're saying, again, not that I'm rushing to retire anybody here, but replacing Lee Keegan or Michael Murphy is not going to be an easy feat. But from a Mayo perspective, there's huge scope for improvement, like absolutely huge scope for improvement. Even to go back to Mick's point about James Horan, he blooded the likes of young Callaghan or Irwin. These are 2 highly touted underage players who had great 20s years. They'll come in and add to already a production line of athletic halfbacks coming into the team. You bring back O'Donoghue, Tommy Conroy, and suddenly you've got the bones that Jordan Flynn was carrying an injury all year. So the scope for improvement there is absolutely massive. And again, they're probably going to face fairly stiff competition in Connacht, as we mentioned earlier. But I think if you're looking at from a Mayo perspective, you'd be fairly optimistic. The only thing is now to get this appointment now, Joe, is crucial, really. It is absolutely crucial that they get it done, and get it done probably early. It was interesting. I was thinking back on it this morning during lockdown when we were all bored out of our minds. I listened to sport and coaching conference. The Sports Ireland did a coaching conference with Paddy Talley. And during that conference, he said that he thinks at no point ever in Gaelic football has what's going on the line has had much impact on Gaelic football. He said, I should stress, he said this is not in an arrogant way, but the level of tactical awareness and coaching that's going on now has never been more important. And he meant that in terms of this is not a thing that happens the night before an Ireland final. This is months and months in advance. So from a Mayo perspective, that's the big crux factor there. But if they get that appointment right, they could absolutely be in an Ireland final next year.
Maurice, on the Tailteann Cup then, so generally deemed a success. Westmeath beat Cavan in the final. I don't know what the viewing figures were like. I don't know what impact it had on the public at large. I don't know if maybe that's all that important in year 1. So what are we saying of the Tailteann Cup?
It probably is important in a sense, Joe, just in terms of to see how Westmeath celebrated locally. I'm talking about here, celebrated that trophy. That there seemed to be a real value on, and I think that's something that will be bought in. To be honest, I think the GA deserve huge credit for the way they sold that competition. There was probably a lot of, I thought there was a lot of complaints before the competition even started about what the direction of it and how it would be promoted. But they streamed nearly every game. They organised launches in Croke Park. Definitely before the competition and definitely before the final. I think there was one other one as well. They did interactive videos. They sat down players and did all the usual stuff that seemed to get people to buy in. So the competition was a success. Teams, by and large, bought in. The games were very competitive, which, as Mick mentioned earlier, is the most important thing. So from that perspective, I think it's been an overwhelming success, really. You couldn't have hoped for much more. And as I say, it's in year one. Of course, there are kinks, but they'll be ironed out. The north and south and people's grievances around that. The fact that I know Andy Moran was pretty vocal about the fact that they wanted more games. We're going to get all of that next year. This was a year one in the project. So from that perspective, I think you couldn't have hoped for much more, really.
Yeah, Colm, I guess the only kind of well, maybe complaint is the word, is it does, it probably struggled to punch its way through and grab headline attention on any given weekend, really.
Well, that's the nature of it. Probably, it's like the maybe not like the FA Cup, but the League Cup or something like that. It doesn't really sustain in the memory for too long because it's not mainstream, and that's the nature of it. But it turned out a good competition. You would have to say it was better than in most expectation of it. The final was a very good game. It's not a repeat business, the Tailteann Cup. That's the only thing. I mean, Westmeath won't be, they obviously can't defend it, but they won't be setting out to retain it anytime soon. And that's the nature of it. I was, at the start, at the very outset, people were complaining about the promotion of it. But how could you promote it when you didn't actually know what teams were in it? So from that point of view, they caught up. Setting aside the semi-finals for a Sunday afternoon certainly helped it. It was the only show in town for Cavan and Sligo and Westmeath and Offaly. I think other counties like Down and Fermanagh will look at it and say, well, maybe we want a piece of that action next year if we don't win or get promotion from Division 3. I think teams will reconcile a lot easier with the fact that there's a competition there, there's a cup there. I think maybe some counties were a little bit sniffy of it this year, that they didn't want to put their noses too near it, but I think that will change. Maurice mentioned Westmeath's celebrations. Certainly Cavan grasped it too, and while they didn't win it, it did create a bit of a stir in that county in the week leading up to it. You could see that, and even the numbers, the crowds that were there as well, certainly. And as the curtain raiser for the semi-final, you could see there was big interest in both counties. I think it's probably back in the early stages of it where it suffers. And when you think that the hurling quarterfinals were relegated to a Saturday, now they've been on Saturdays before in the past, but they were relegated. So it was a big sacrifice for the GA to make, to put the semi-finals, to give it a profile, and obviously, to have a contribution of 60,000 to a holiday fund and all of those things. They did put a lot into it, and they got a lot out of it too. As I said, it's not for repeat business. I don't think even Cavan, if they didn't make it out of Division 3, would have a huge appetite for it next year. And that's probably ultimately where it will fall down over a period of time, I think, in that teams won't be spoiling ever to win the Tailteann Cup until they're at. It's not one you can ever set out to win. And I think in the case of those who've been to finals, there won't be a huge appetite at the time from the same group to go back and try and win it again, unless their aim will solely be to obviously progress up the divisions in the league.
Mick, we'll proceed with the next talking point on the general accepted understanding that nobody cares about the lot of journalists, but this year was definitely a year where media relations seemed to take a nosedive, and we didn't hear from managers all too often, and media days seem to have by and large dried up. Is that a situation you see improving next year and beyond, or is this the new reality now?
I think it's been the reality for a long time, really.
Was it not worse this year? No.
I know what the lads think. I remember when I started out in this caper, in the mid-late 90s, there was plenty of restrictions as well. I think what the difference is now, it's more structured restriction. There's a hell of a lot more kind of control, and there's a hell of a lot more layers that you have to go through to even reach a player. That kind of way. You were always kind of working ahead maybe a week or 10 days or whatever in the olden days, as you'd have to call them now. But now it's just forget it. It's just completely and utterly forget it. I mean, last year was the first year I went through a season without interviewing a single player until after the championship.
Right.
This year managed to interview a couple, all right. But as you say, I always think this is a little bit like Tombo making sausages. I mean, no one apart from the lads who are working in the factory really care, as long as it comes out the other side. But at the same time, I suppose the wider issue on this is that when you have a condensed season, and when you also have a situation where a lot of media is now focusing digitally, and you can see exactly what people are reading and not reading or consuming, that will have an impact on your GAA in inverted. I hate the word. I'm not even going to say it. Your GAA coverage. I was going to say content. I hate that word. GAA coverage, right? So if it's the case that the GAA and counties and teams restrict access to players, managers, the people that the public may want to hear from, that is going to impact on your coverage. It's going to reduce your coverage. It's going to affect. From a GA perspective, from an overall GA perspective, it's going to affect how your product is promoted out there. And on a wider issue, I think it'll probably it could end up costing jobs down the track. But that's a completely other different conversation, you know?
Yeah. Fellas, we've to begin to bring this to a close. Time is against us. I guess the managerial merry-go-round now is very much in full swing and lots of significant appointments to be made. Colm, no doubt you're very interested in Colm O'Rourke's appointment. Meath at the he went for the job 3 times. I don't know if he went for it this time, but we'll call it 4th time of asking, or 4th opportunity, and they've decided at 65 Colm O'Rourke finally ready for this job.
Well, he's managed a lot of teams over a long period of time. His own club, Simonstown, I think he's managed Simonstown 4 times in the last 2 decades. And he's had success, county championship back-to-back with a club that had never won it before. He's obviously kept his hand in with schools as well, with St. Pat's. I think he's always been senior manager there. But it is a big leap for Colm to make into senior inter-county management, because it's a hell of a lot different than what it was when he was a player. I wasn't surprised he was in the frame. I know he didn't commit to it. I know he said, I certainly don't recall him going for it 3 times. I might recall it once in 2004 when he put a blueprint in, which he would do the job of a number of other changes, which were very broad and wide-ranging. He certainly did go for it. And Sean Boylan was actually still in place, but the county board knocked that back. It was far too radical at the time. It's a given now. In fact, it would probably be antiquated what he put in then. And he did go for it 2013, but I'm not sure how wholeheartedly he went for it then. Because I think if he did really go for it in any time in the past, he would have got it. Okay. It's a big jump for him, and he's coming in at a time when expectation in the county really isn't all that high. The only reason it would heighten is because he's there now. And I was listening to yourself and Liam Hayes talking, and Liam was very, very enthusiastic about Colm taking over. The fact of the matter is, I'm not so sure the players are in the county to make any real sustained progress that people would expect from an appointment like this. Next year's Division 2, they have Dublin, Derry, Kildare, an improving Cork, and a Clare team that knocked them out of the championship on top of Limerick and Louth. That's not easy for Meath. You know, they were pretty close to going the other way this year. So they have had a little bit of minor success, but that has never translated into under 20 success. It's an amazing record that they've only been, amazingly poor record that they've only been to one under 2021 final in 21 years. And they haven't won that. Dublin beat them in, I think it was 2014. I mean, the club scene is not good either. Right. You haven't had a Meath team in a Leinster club final for a long time. 2004, if I recall, was the last time. So that the club scene is not great. The production line from minor to under 20 isn't great. But Colm will create a very, very good environment for teams. He's a great communicator. And I think if he puts a decent backroom team on top of the 2 selectors he has there, he can make some gains. But I wouldn't be too expectant of it, I have to say, because I'm not so sure over the next three years whether the material is there to make those gains. Okay. But you look at Armagh, we were talking about teams there. Look at Armagh. Armagh's underage success hasn't been great, but slowly but surely Kieran McGeeney has brought them round. He's kept them in Division 1 again this year and reached an All-Ireland quarter-final and took Galway to extra time, and look where Galway are. So they haven't been bursting at the seams with underage success either. So there's probably a template there for the likes of Meath to be able to follow in their terms to get the most. But it's going to take a lot of time. Okay, fellas, we are out of time. Thank you so much. That was great. Mick Foley of the Sunday Times, Maurice Brosnan of the 42, Colm Keys of the Irish Independent. Appreciate it, fellas. Thank you so much. Thanks, Joe.